From beavers to burials, the Scottish Government send out press releases on every aspect of life, but not a £10 billion trade deal with China. A row over Chinese whispers. Why didn't the Scottish Government shout about this trade agreement? We'll be asking the SNP, as the opposition say they have grave concerns. We cover the campaign every day, but what's brewing in voters' minds? You tell us what you think about the big election issues. And demonstrations on the streets of Iceland tonight as the country is plunged into scandal by the Panama Papers. Good evening. The Scottish Government's published an investment agreement with a Chinese consortium, potentially worth £10 billion. Good news, you might think. But the deal was signed on the 21st of March and wasn't officially announced by ministers. The details emerged last night, sparking claims the government signed a secret deal. Andrew Black has more.
It's February and the people of Glasgow are celebrating the start of Chinese New Year. Scotland and China are two countries with long-standing cultural and trade links, but questions are now being asked about a major investment agreement signed by the Scottish Government and a Chinese consortium. The agreement, which could be worth up to £10 billion, was signed in Edinburgh on the 21st of March by First Minister Nicola Sturgeon, Chinese investment group Sino-Fortone and China Railway No. 3 Engineering Group, the world's largest construction company. That day it was announced by Sino-Fortone on its website. But it wasn't until the 3rd of April when news of the deal emerged in Scotland. The Scottish Government has now published a Memorandum of Understanding about the deal, which commits both sides to work together to develop a programme of potential projects for investment. But opposition parties say the Scottish Government has embarked on a risky strategy.
The SNP are never backwards at coming forwards on these things, and it's a big £10 billion agreement that's been signed. I think we need to have a better understanding as to why they kept it secret for so long.
I've got grave concerns about this memorandum that the First Minister has signed with a Chinese company. One of my concerns is why we only found out about it through the Chinese private company's website, why this wasn't explained to Parliament, why the Scottish Government didn't choose to publish it until it was already in the public domain.
However, Nicola Sturgeon has insisted this is no secret agreement. The SNP leader may well be looking to the day when she can drink a toast to a formal deal. For now, she says things are just being discussed.
Well, opponents are frankly talking nonsense. This is an agreement to look at where there is potential for significant investment into Scotland. And, frankly, if my political opponents are saying that as First Minister I shouldn't encourage investment into Scotland, then all I think they're doing is demonstrating that they're not fit to be in the job.
This has all come amid continued concerns about the UK steel industry and questions about where any Scots-Chinese deal might lead.
If the Chinese are going to invest in public infrastructure here in Scotland, will it be Chinese steel or British steel? I think right now we need to know the answers to those questions. We see thousands of jobs across the UK hanging in the balance when it comes to British steel. I think we would like to see investment into our core industries here in Scotland and across the UK.
So in the white-hot heat of political campaigning, the SNP says it will continue to boost Scotland on the world stage. Their opponents argue they need to go about it more openly.
Well, earlier I spoke to Willie Rennie, the Scottish Lib Dem leader, who was in our Edinburgh studio. And here in this studio, Keith Brown, who's speaking for the SNP. He's the Infrastructure Secretary in the Scottish Government. Keith Brown, on Monday, March the 21st, I received 9 emails from the Scottish Government ranging from children's rights to race equality, a £1.8 million investment in an Aberdeen oil firm, but nothing about a £10 billion trade deal agreement. Why was that?
Well, the last example you gave was £1.8 million of investment. There is no investment attached to this particular minute of agreement. This is just a minute of agreement to have further discussions, to facilitate those discussions. Of course, it could potentially be very lucrative for Scotland, great in terms of jobs and communities and businesses, but there is no project that's been announced at this stage. And of course, it was published. We've published both the MOU and separately we agreed with the Chinese partners that a press release agreed by both parties could be issued, which it was, on their English language website. So this has been published, but as yet there are no projects for us to announce.
So the people of China heard about this deal because it went through the Xinhua State news agency and was published in the China Daily. But nothing for the people of Scotland.
Well, that's not true. The company involved, they published it on their English language website. Now, this company has investments right across the UK. They're well known to authorities and governments in the UK. So this is a well-known company. And they published it on their website, an agreed press release with the Scottish Government. But I repeat once again, there were no projects at this stage for us to announce. If you look at Wales, for example, 5 years of work before a major announcement on the projects which are recently announced in terms of Port Talbot.
But this is a government that's not backwards about coming forwards in terms of press releases and so on. I got 9 in that one day, as I said. You said it was published in the Sino-Fortone website, but how many people are looking at that? Why were the Scottish media not informed?
Well, I've explained, first of all, the minute of agreement has been published, but also the fact that the press release, an agreed press release issued under agreed circumstance, hardly chimes with some of the opposition calls that this is somehow a secret deal when it's been published on a public website in English language. But this is about a First Minister going out trying to attract money to Scotland. I would have thought the other parties, which have criticised us both for announcing things which they don't think are substantial enough, and now not announcing something for which there is no substance as yet in terms of a project, I think they've got this wrong. And the First Minister, trying to attract jobs to Scotland and investment, is doing exactly the right thing.
Willie Reddy, what's wrong with a £10 billion deal for Scotland?
Well, Andrew, I think your questions are very pertinent. I know that Keith is a very modest man, but the SNP are not, and they like to brag at every opportunity they can about anything they do at all. So it doesn't really make sense. It's quite curious how they've not announced this. They would usually take every opportunity. But I want to get to the substance of this. I want to understand really what is the deal about. What are the terms? Is it just finance, or are there operations involved too? And what checks have been done on these two companies? Have they got a good track record of working in this area? And has Keith pursued this personally himself? I would like to know that.
Well, Keith Brown, let's put that back to you. We've got the Memorandum of Understanding here. What is in it for China? What is the quid pro quo for China when it comes to these deals?
Well, first of all, I note that Willie completely failed to answer the question he put to him, why it was bad news for Scotland to have a £10 billion deal. But the minute of agreement announces there, it actually lays out the fact that any announcement, any project that's taken forward would have to be compliant both with Scottish law and with EU law. There is no quid pro quo given here. China invests around the world currently. They do so on a huge scale, and there's no reason why Scotland should not have some of that investment coming to Scotland, whether it's for affordable housing, whether it's for transport. That's not specified yet because we're not at that stage yet. But it's got to be a good thing to be talking to people like this to try and get money into Scotland.
So Keith, my question specifically, very specific questions, was is this about finance or is it about operations too? That's the first thing. But secondly, have you personally reviewed the performance of these two companies? Have they got a good track record? Do you know that before this agreement was signed?
Keith Brown, can you answer that? Is it finance, operations, and have you reviewed the track record of these two companies, Sino-Fortune and the China Railway No. 3 engineering group?
Well, once again, I note that Willie refuses to answer the question whether £10 billion of investment is good for Scotland. But of course it's about finance. That figure is in the minimum of agreement, £10 billion. We're not at the stage of discussing, I've said this 2 or 3 times now, we're not at the stage, whether it's the different parties involved or the Scottish Government, of discussing particular projects. What we have said is, and what the Chinese have said, there is potentially a pot of £10 billion here. Now, I would have thought that any responsible government, and certainly a First Minister interested in selling Scotland, will want to try and get access to that money for the public benefit of people in Scotland.
Well, Willie Rennie, Mr Brown has pointed out that you need to answer this question. What is wrong with a £10 billion deal for Scotland? You need to answer that.
Well, on the right terms, it's a good thing, but I want to understand if these are the right terms. And he's not answered my question yet again. Has he personally reviewed these two companies? Does he know whether they've got a good track record or not? Because I think that's fundamental to this agreement. And his inability to answer that question so far actually concerns me. Has he personally reviewed,
Have they got a good track record?
Well, Mr Brown, if you would like to answer that point.
I'm pleased at last that Willie has recognised that it might be a good thing for Scotland if we can get £10 billion of investment for jobs in our communities. In relation to the companies involved, of course, they deal with governments around the UK already. The UK government is dealing with these companies, has done a deal with these companies. The Welsh government has also done a deal with a company concerned as well, or they're involved alongside the UK government. So they have a track record. But we are not at the stage of actually announcing a project here. Of course, there's further to go. It's got to be a good idea to have these discussions and for Scotland to attract foreign direct investment.
Finally, Mr Brown, is it not a little embarrassing that today your SNP colleague George Caravan, who's a MP, is writing in The National today, essentially criticising Chinese imperialism? It's a little bit awkward, isn't it?
Well, what he was talking about, of course, were the massive investments which the UK government has asked for China to undertake into strategic things like nuclear power stations in the UK. This is not on the table for Scotland.
OK, Keith Brown, Willie Rennie, thank you both very much for joining me. Thank you. Now, Scotland remains divided in attitudes to taxation, according to a new poll for BBC Scotland. The survey suggests support for increasing the very top rate of tax. But there's also apparent backing for keeping Scottish tax rates in line with England. We'll hear more from our political editor in a moment, but first, here's more on the findings.
This is the Edinburgh Beer Factory. A craft brewery with a dozen staff. They're small but ambitious.
Because we need to lager the beer for about 6 weeks.
Production only started last summer. To succeed, they need Scotland to prosper. So tax and spending really matter.
With Holyrood gaining new powers, the question of tax is predominant in this election. Should people in Scotland be prepared to pay more tax, perhaps to fund services such as education? Or should tax here be the same as it is in the rest of the UK? What about the standard rate? What about the upper rate? Big questions.
In our poll, respondents were asked to rate policies from 1 up to 10, producing an average score. First, the idea of increasing all rates of income tax by 1 penny in the pound. That's backed by Labour and the Liberal Democrats. In our poll, it rated 6.2. But it was slightly outpolled by the idea of keeping the Scottish rate of income tax the same as in England. That plan, backed by Conservatives, rated 6.5. Higher ranked still was Labour's idea of increasing the very top rate for those earning more than £150,000 from 45 pence to 50 pence. That rate is 7.3, relatively popular. Among brewery staff, some are willing to pay more tax.
The fact that we prioritise free education and free healthcare, if that obviously comes at a cost, and if that's higher taxation, I think that's fine.
It's a penny. I don't think we'll feel it, and for the funds we could raise and the good that we could do, we should do it.
Some think it's simply wrong that people in Scotland should pay more.
I feel we all work very hard. It's a bit galling to think I could be working as hard and earning the same amount of money 60 miles down the road in Berwick.
Some fear the impact on low earners, even although both Labour and the Lib Dems say they'd protect those earning less than 20,000.
I just don't think that's a lot of money. So if, in a family or a single mum or someone that is in trouble, I think that might have an effect.
Critics say even if the starting rate for tax increases, people in Scotland would still end up paying more than in England. The Dems say a new zero-rate band could help. But how about that top-rate tax plan? Opinion was divided.
Personally, I don't buy into the idea that a higher rate of income tax for higher earners is going to scare off those within that bracket.
The top rate tax is sort of irrelevant because you don't raise any money, and there's about 17,000 people in the whole of Scotland who are eligible, so it won't solve any problem. So I would be putting tax up across the board.
The SNP would leave Scottish tax rates alone, but would reverse most of a scheduled tax cut for higher earners by altering the threshold for the upper 40 pence rate. Those details emerged after our survey questions were drafted. But we did ask about the general notion of keeping the higher tax threshold at the current 2016 rate, even if it's raised elsewhere. That rated 5.3, round about the midway point. The SNP say support for their brew is strengthening as people realise it's aimed at higher earners while protecting the low paid. Back to the staff. They generally wanted real delivery from public services if they had to pay more tax.
If there was a higher rate of income tax in Scotland, I'd want to see the benefit of that in terms of health, environment, education, really across the range of areas where they have actually control.
On council tax, our survey suggests folk favour higher charges for more expensive homes. Finally, welfare. More money for those who care for people with disabilities was rated 6.4. Higher still, there was 7.3 support for the idea of doubling the level of childcare for 3- and 4-year-olds. That's an SNP policy, although other parties also have childcare offers. Your election, your choice.
Well, just before we came on air, I caught up with our political editor, Brian, and began by asking him about the higher 50p rate of income tax. Respondents seemed keen for the rich to pay a bit more.
In our survey, it comes out as the most popular in a bunch, among the bunch of views on taxation, and Labour are understandably pointing out that fact from our survey. But it is at 7.3. It's not 8 or 9, the sort of figures one used to see in perhaps in previous opinion polls, where opinion was perhaps more divergent. And it's at the same time, perhaps it's no great surprise if people are in favour of a 50p top tax rate. There's only 17,000 people in the whole of Scotland actually would potentially face that rate. So perhaps you're seeing the majority of the population saying, if I want extra spending, I want more taxes and I want them to pay, and that's perhaps an understandable emotion from those who are responding to our survey.
And so 10, of course, would be the top, the standout star policy. But when you look at the middle ranking rates, the offers from the parties, there's no real standout star, is there?
Really quite struck by that, Andrew, across the policies, many of which we'll see in our survey tomorrow, but across taxation today, across issues like council tax, they aren't hugely differentiated. Yes, there are differences, of course, but they aren't hugely differentiated. They're tending to be in that 5, 6 and 7 bracket, whereas in previous opinion polls at previous both Scottish and UK elections, you saw on occasions some policies that are soar-away favourites and some that were absolute no-nos, from 9 to 1 or whatever. And this tends to be a little bit of a lack of differentiation. Perhaps it's the new powers, it's the responsibility of these decisions, it's people making their minds up.
I wonder how the parties gauge that. It must be quite difficult for them to see that. They think they've come up with this policy, but no standout policy.
They have to know, of course, that the public are weighing these things very carefully. This isn't a beauty contest. This isn't an exercise in macho breastbeating. These are public spending policies. These are, above all, taxation policies that will have a real impact upon voters, a real impact upon businesses. And in those circumstances, it is incumbent upon the parties to think seriously about the impact of the policies they're announcing. And it's incumbent, of course, upon the voters, as I'm sure they will, to choose carefully.
And Brian, on council tax, a similar theme again. Folk are quite happy for the rich person next door to pay a bit more, but not maybe from their wallet.
Come on, it's an understandable human emotion, isn't it? Lord, make me virtuous, but not yet, oh Lord, and perhaps just landed on the guy down the road. With council tax, the general impression is that if folk favour anything, they favour the higher banded homes, the more expensive homes facing the highest increase.
And you're looking at more issues tomorrow. What's coming up then?
Well, today it was kind of tax and council tax and welfare. Tomorrow it's the range of other policies. Lots on health, lots on education, issues like fracking, issues like the ban on certain songs being sung at football grounds, and issues like the one that is there always in the background in Scottish politics, the Constitution, independence.
Of course, Brian Taylor, thank you very much. And just a reminder, tomorrow night's programme will be another 2016 special debate on tax with a panel of politicians answering questions from an invited audience. That's at our normal time of 10:30 here on BBC Two. Now, something is rotten in the state of Iceland. Tonight, thousands of people are protesting in the capital, Reykjavik, following the leak of the Panama Papers. They're calling on the Prime Minister, Sigmundur Gunnlaugsson, and his government to resign after details of his family's financial affairs were revealed. He's accused of hiding millions of dollars in the country's banks behind a secretive offshore company. Mr Gunnlaugsson says no rules were broken. Well, in our Edinburgh studio is the Icelandic journalist Tor Fandel. Good evening to you, Tor. Thank you for joining me. First of all, it's a real political crisis in Iceland tonight, although the PM strenuously denies any wrongdoing.
Well, the PM is behaving like he's behaved for the whole term. He lives in a entirely different reality than the rest of the country, and now we know that his finances are kept outside of Iceland.
And how might this pan out, do you think? I mean, just watching the protesters there, this is indeed a serious political crisis for Iceland.
I mean, Icelanders are angry. We watched the cabinet implode under the weight of its corruption in the last few weeks. We watched, as the world did too, when our Prime Minister was exposed as a liar, a fraud and a hypocrite. I mean, obviously people are furious. I mean, this is a man that he is a demagogue. I mean, to put him in a UK context, he is like a mix of Nigel Farage on steroids with a less funny Boris Johnson.
So
I mean,
what does this mean for Iceland then? Because in a way, I suppose, national pride must really have been dented, perhaps, when you see the extent of the Panama Papers leak on Iceland.
I'm sure for many people this will dent our pride, but I think most people will realise eventually that this is healthy for us, and we need to look into these things, and we cannot keep perpetuating this utopian progressive image to the outside world while this sort of stuff is going on. We have 10 cabinet ministers in Iceland. 3 of them own offshore companies. That means that Iceland is probably one of the most offshored countries in the world.
And just finally, that is the view that we have of Iceland, that it is perhaps this utopia, this kind of perfect Nordic model.
Well, it's been proven that it's entirely false. And even now, I mean, I think most people are gobsmacked seeing a Prime Minister that has just been revealed not only to have properties and wealth in tax havens, but also that interview that the world watched. It was filmed on March the 11th. We watched him deny this since the 15th, and now we realize that there was a video of him lying to foreign journalists and Icelandic journalists. So, I mean, obviously, it's unbelievable.
Tor Fandel, thank you very much for joining me. Thank you.
Thank you.
Now let's speak to Libby Brooks, the Guardian Scotland correspondent, and Kieran Andrews, the political editor of the Courier. Good evening to both of you, here to pick up on some of the stories we've been covering on the programme. Let's pick up on the Panama Papers first of all. And Libby, let's just pick up on what Tor was saying. It's a real crisis for Iceland just now, isn't it?
It seems to be, doesn't it? Although I have to say, good for the Icelandic people being out on the streets. I don't notice anybody out, well, last time I looked, anybody out on the streets of London complaining about David Cameron's family's involvement in this.
And Kieran, I suppose when you look at it, to broaden it out, it does show the extent of how the rich have been hiding their wealth, and this is just one law firm.
Well, absolutely. Who would have thought that Vladimir Putin, the Icelandic Prime Minister, and Lionel Messi would have been the poster boys for tax dodging across the country? And as you say, it's one tranche of documents from one firm. This almost certainly goes far, far wider than what we've seen and in some great journalism by the BBC, The Guardian, but it must go much further than that, which is a big worry for how you think about the money that's being lost, our money for our hospitals, schools, roads. It's been dodged so that people who have it can just hoard it. That is the thing, isn't it? But public services will have lost out. Absolutely, they will have lost out big time. And this goes wider than the UK, but it must be embarrassing for David Cameron and George Osborne. Put aside the fact for a second that David Cameron's father has been named in these documents, but they've been crowing about their efforts to snare the tax dodgers, to bring in money, to give it to worthy charities. And here we see it's the tip of the iceberg. They're getting nowhere near the full amounts that they could be. Libby, Keir mentioned investigative journalism. The BBC, The Guardian, of course, other international organisations have been investigating this. It shows the merits of
funding investigative journalism, particularly when HMRC are now asking to see these papers.
Yeah, completely. I mean, I think one of the really interesting things about it is it shows how essential data and data journalism has come sort of to the way that we investigate issues now. You know, when you think, I mean, it's extraordinary when you look at it. You had over 100 media organisations looking at these documents, you know, 11 million over, I think it was 3 months. Extraordinary that nobody leaked it or left it in the pub, unlike certain political parties that shall remain nameless. But it is, yeah, I think journalism increasingly is sort of looking for people who are sort of really specialised in dealing with these huge tranches of information and, you know, picking those stories out of them.
Kieran, closer to home, we've got the BBC poll. What did you make of that? In a way, it's a very human way of looking at things. I want him to pay more, but not me.
Well, I think it really puts a pin in the thought that Scots are somehow more compassionate or happy to pay more than the rest of the UK. The only area where we want to put tax up, according to this poll, is at the very top rate, where most Scots will never get to in their wildest dreams, will never pay £150,000 or more. So what we're seeing here is people saying, well, I want to pay the same. I want things to get better. I want the people who earn more than me to pay more. But no, not me. I don't want that cash to leave my pay packet. I thought it was very interesting on council tax, moving away from the income tax, where people said they wanted people to pay more if they had big houses, but they didn't want everyone to pay more at somewhere on a sliding scale, even when it was specifically put to pay for children's education. I think if you want a sign that we're not the great, compassionate, socialist nation, that was it right there.
That was interesting. And Libby, of course, the respondents suggested as well, just to go back to income tax, that they weren't maybe particularly impressed by all the parties' offers when it came to the middle tax.
It's true, although they did say there was a sort of sizable group of people who were saying that they were up for adding a penny on tax sort of across the board, and obviously that's both the Lib Dems and Labour have been supporting that. So I'm not feeling quite as gloomy as you are. I felt like there was a little bit of hope for progressives, yeah. OK,
let's pick up on the top story, Kieran, we had. This Chinese memorandum of understanding, this agreement, what do you make of it? Is this cock-up conspiracy? It's quite hard maybe to get a handle on this story.
Well, it's very curious. The Scottish Government aren't shy in putting out press releases, particularly when there's potentially a lot of good news there for them, which, from reading the memorandum, there seems to be. It's early stages. Keith Brown was on here earlier saying nothing has been signed, and that's fine, but you would have thought the potential of up to £10 billion of investment would have been the sort of thing you could have put out in a press release. They haven't done that. It's very unlike them. I don't think they've gamed it out very well, which is also very unlike the Scottish Government press machine. Although it's possibly worth pointing out, this time 5 years ago, just before the last Holyrood election, to much fanfare, Alex Salmond announced a memorandum of understanding to bring thousands of jobs to Dundee's port. Perhaps our fingers are still burnt from not a single job emerging from that.
Right, and Libby, what do you make of it?
Well, I sort of similarly to Kieran, it's quite curious, isn't it? I mean, I do think that, you know, it's not the time to be seen to be shaking hands with China, and there's such bad feeling across the country toward the way that they've been dumping steel on the international market. So perhaps it's not surprising. You know, on the plus side, as Brian was saying as well, it is showing that the Scottish Government is sort of internationally facing, outward looking, and you know, we do need that amount of investment in the country, certainly.
Kieran, just very briefly, we probably do need that investment.
Yeah, absolutely. If the investment comes, it's a great thing, which is why it's confusing. They decided it wasn't worth telling us about.
OK, you too, Kieran and Libby, thank you both very much for joining me. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Now, that's it for tonight. Thanks very much for being with us here this evening. Shelley's back with you tomorrow for that hour-long special on the party's tax plans. Do please join her then, 10:30 here on BBC Two. From all of us just now, though, have a good night. Bye-bye.